It's the really short reading from Etty Hillesum. One must keep in touch with the real world and know one's place in it. It is wrong to live only with the eternal truths, for then one is apt to end up behaving like an ostrich. To live fully, outwardly and inwardly, not to ignore external reality for the sake of the inner life, or the reverse, that's quite a task.
So Etty Hillesum is talking about the inner world and the outer world. And it was particularly scary for her as her inner musings on the nature of reality were done in the shadow of Auschwitz, as she was writing about the sort of things that we talk about here in the chapel. People around her were being murdered and dragged off to concentration camps. And Heather's going to be talking more about Etty as part of our spring retreat program, The Voice of the Feminine. You might have got a letter about it, and it's currently on our website. But what we're doing here is it's the last of a series. Those of you here for the first time have missed the entire series. But you can catch up on the series if you want to. If you look at the red cards in the seats in front of you, it shows you how to get hold of listening to these in a podcast or just watching the message itself. You can get that on our website. And if you want to be on our mailing list, the blue card in front of you, if you fill that in and just put it in one of these plates, then you can go on our mailing list and we'll let you know what's happening in the chapel. So over this series, we've been looking at what we're called to do by life. And I've been using that verse from Micah to unpack that with Heather. That verse which says, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and love mercy and walk humbly with our God. And we're also faced with how we adapt all our inner musing, our sort of nasal gazing with the realities of life as it goes on around us. You know, just those words from Etty again. One must keep in touch with the real world and know one's place in it. It is wrong to live only for the eternal truths, for then one's apt to end up behaving like an ostrich. To live fully, outwardly and inwardly, not to ignore the external reality for the sake of the inner life or the reverse, that's quite a task. And that's really what I want to talk about today. Having talked about, what life is, what we're called to do, how do you bridge that gap between the outer world and the inner world with all the stuff that goes on, the cooking that was due on Thursday and all those people turning up and all the demands. I was going around City Market the other day and all I could see was mums with their daughters and the daughters saying, are we having this year? Are we having that? And people piling all their stuff. There's a sense of panic going on as we were going around. And that's a minor thing compared to what's going on in life, but we do have that. Our task is simpler than Etty's in the most part because, we're not in immediate danger. However, we still have to deal with that day-to-day living while we try and exercise right judgment and practice loving kindness and walk with humility in our lives, the areas that we've been covering over the last few weeks. Exercising right judgment means really acknowledging the nature of reality, that in truth we're not separate, that we're connected in the world. And when you come from that connectedness, the judgments that you make are different from the judgments that you make if you think you're all separate. But how do we square that when someone's coming towards us with a knife? There's the inner world and the outer world. We're asked to practice loving kindness. And yet it seems in the world, the world doesn't always practice loving kindness towards us or anybody else. And you just have to look at the news. And in walking with humility, we're in danger of other people stepping right over us and taking advantage of us. And as we're trying to make a contribution by not pushing ourselves forward, they say, right, out the way, I'll take that space. So how do we square that? Well, I mean, obviously, the answer lies in wisdom. You have to have the wisdom to be able to square that. And having a wisdom that's real and that guides us through life. Not just a whole load of good ideas that the moment they really get tested just fail and leave us despondent and faced with harsh realities. That's always the thing with religion. You know, if you are living in an idealized, fabricated reality in your head, the moment the train starts coming towards you and the whole thing falls apart, there's nothing that you can rely on. But you need a wisdom that equips us to deal with whatever comes our way, a wisdom that is real and that can guide us. In the first week, we talked a little bit about listening from our hearts to find the wisdom of our heart. And it's out of that wisdom of our heart that we need to be responding to life. That the heart that releases what Heather called the divine capacities. Things like peace and joy and love and kindness and faithfulness and modesty and self-control. And having those will take us some way to sanctify the world around us. Those very capacities tend to disarm the world through the power that comes from that divine spark that originates within them. It's almost that these divine capacities create a hallowed ground that other people have to walk on, and therefore they think twice about acting. I always remember a story. I was in a taxi in London, and taxi drivers in London can be incredibly rude, as they probably can be here. But this guy was so rude to me, and it was a £5 journey, and he was thoroughly horrible. Anyway, as I left, I paid my £5 and gave him a £20 tip, and looked at him and said, "Thanks very much." And I could see the confusion on his face. And it's something when you do something that is completely disarming. And I think those capacities do disarming. But it doesn't seem quite enough to protect us. And I think we're looking at those realities. How do you make yourself safe? And I always I mentioned this before, but safety is the real meaning of the word salvation in the churches. Salvation is what we're looking for. What it really means, salvation is a place of safety. It comes from the Hebrew word Yeshua, which means relief in a sense of being rescued from an enemy or trouble or illness. It is a place of safety. And that's really what we want wisdom to lead us to. We want wisdom to lead us to a place of safety. And, we used this quote last week, but it's interesting that in that quote from Thomas Merton, it ends up with salvation. That quote that says, "God utters me like a word containing a partial thought of himself. A word will never be able to comprehend the voice that utters it." So we're like the word that were uttered into the universe by that divine nature. And he says, but if I'm true to the concept that God utters in me, if I'm true to the thought of him that I was meant to embody, I shall be full of his actuality and find him everywhere in myself and find myself nowhere. That's what we're really trying to get at here, is being that divine nature in the world. I shall be lost in him. That is, I shall find myself. And then he uses the words at the end, I shall be saved. And we always think, saved, that means like, giving your life to the Lord so that you can, evangelically do the stuff that you need to do. But really, it is a place of safety. It is where you can feel that essence of safetiness. What is it that we can be sure of so that we know that our feet are firmly on the ground as we try to manifest, to make evident that true reality to others? Where does that wisdom come from? What is the one thing that links the inner and the outer? Anyone? The one thing, I think the place of safety, and you might groan when I say this, but I think the thing that links the inner and the outer, the place where we know we're safe, is our breath. Our breath is the link between the inner and the outer world. We had a little bit of experience at the beginning of the service. It actually makes the inner and the outer one as we participate in both. It is what connects those eternal thoughts and everything like that and the outside world. That's the place where it actually happens. Our breath is the bridge upon which we can stand as we navigate our way to a firm reality. It's a firm bridge in that it's always there and we can always come back to it. It is really the one thing that we can rely on as being real. And it is therefore the building block of all our ideas about the nature of reality. And it is through our breath that our wisdom comes. It's through our breath opens our hearts, our being in our body through our breath, our connection with the inner and the outer. And of course, the Greek word for breath is pneuma, spelt P-N-E-U-M-A, all about breathing. We get the word pneumonia from it. That's the Greek word for breath. And in the New Testament, the word pneuma is used to mean spirit. When for example, in John 3, when Jesus says, very truly, I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless you're born of water and the Spirit. The word for spirit is pneuma in that verse. It means breath, water and breath. The word for spirit is pneuma. And when Jesus was led by the Spirit, pneuma, he went into the desert. The same word. Blessed are the poor in spirit. It's the same word. So there is quite a focus in both the Old Testament and New Testament on breath. God says he will pour his Spirit into them. Again, same word. And in the Bible, the Greek word for breath and the Spirit, therefore, are the same word. In fact, the word spirit comes from the Latin word spirare. And guess what spirare means? Breath. That's what that means. So our whole concept of spirit and spirituality is actually founded on breath. It is seen by the Judeo-Christian religion as the place where God meets us. And, other religions have the same. In the Hindu Upanishads, it says, man does not live by, not bread alone, but in the Upanishads, it says, man does not live by breath alone, that is breath rather than bread, but in him in whom is the power of breath. So it's the nature, the power that is within breath. And the Taoists say the spirit cannot be stabilized by force. When the mind and the breath rest on each other, then the spirit naturally stabilizes. This is said because mind, breath, and spirit are one. The mind and breath are manifestations of the spirit. So it's interesting, in the Taoist understanding, the breath brings them, the spirit is the mind and the breath coming together. And that is the spirit. That's when the spirit emerges, when wisdom is emerging. Mind and breath resting on each other. And Lao Tzu, again, Taoist, says, the space between heaven and earth is like a bellows. Human beings are born by virtue of the energy of heaven and earth. Respiration is the mechanism of the bellows. Breathing is the mechanism of the bellows. So when we're looking for a place where we can go, we can actually feel the reality of life, it must be to the breath that we go. It just is. And it's not a moderated, it's not a virtual reality that the mind is showing us. It's real and it's true, and it's a place we can inhabit without question. Breath is aliveness made real. Aliveness is characterized by breath. And when our mind and breath rest in each other, then we're resting in aliveness, the spirit. We're resting in the spirit. Our breath is the starting point when we're looking for wisdom. The wisdom of the heart rather than the knowledge of the mind. Two very different things. The wisdom of the heart rather than the knowledge of the mind. Which again shows the importance, and I do bang on about this, of meditation and spiritual practice where we inhabit our breath. We inhabit the breath and life in the Spirit, opening our hearts in the seat of our consciousness to receive from that divine nature through the breath, that true reality. And by inhabiting our breath, most of the time we don't inhabit the breath. We just breathe and as we go about our thing. But when you inhabit the breath, when you're skiing down that slope, and you're not just looking, you're inhabiting the breath, then there's a consciousness that's there. We open a channel to the center of reality, the ground of all being, and we receive the insight that we need to expand our consciousness. When we're conscious of our breath, we receive the insight we need to expand our consciousness, which is really what we're trying to do. We're trying to expand our consciousness. Insight comes through breath. It arrives from our inner self. It is the connection to the ordering principle of life that enables us to expand both our mind and our consciousness. And it's this that enables us to see into the morass of darkness that's the universe, to live on the bridge from aliveness to aliveness. Because there is no more important work at the coalface than breath. It takes you out of the controlling nature of the mind and opens the portal of your heart to be fed and enlightened by the ordering principle of the universe. It opens us up to the universal mind, the thing that keeps all this together. How do you know what keeps it all together? I don't know what keeps it all together, but something does. There's an ordering principle. And if there is an ordering principle, then I'd like to be connected to it. Thank you very much. Rather than try and make it all up myself and think I know what's going on. And a focus on the breath teaches us how to love. We do it with no expectation of return, not to get better or wealthier or more enlightened. We do it out of our love for the universe, which in turn teaches us how to love. And from that, you get a sense of how we connect to the divine reality through breath. God is literally speaking through our breath and playing us like an instrument, like that quote from Merton. Through our focus on the breath, a new wisdom comes through, a wisdom not generated by the mind. And, it may be simple, but, this is where the revolution begins. It begins with the wisdom that comes from our breath. And if you don't want to take it from me, take it from Rowan Williams, who was the last Archbishop of Canterbury. Rowan Williams said, to put it boldly, meditation is the only ultimate answer. That's quite a bold statement. Meditation is the only ultimate answer to the unreal and insane world that our financial systems and our advertising culture and our chaotic and unexamined emotions encourage us to inhabit. It is the only solution out of the advertising, finance, emotion, all that sort of business. He says to learn meditative practice is to learn what we need so as to live truthfully and honestly and lovingly. It is a deeply revolutionary matter. That's what he says. And it is through that connection that our wisdom comes about. Not through think it through, but through, and it's not easy. You really got to want to do it. You've got to really focus on it, to have that way. People think, well, where does it come from? This is where it comes from. And when we're talking about linking the inner and the outer world, we're talking here about the way which we bring wisdom into the world, which really will solve some of the problems that, you can see all around you. How to read a situation, how to see the true nature of reality. Not one that's dreamt up by our minds with all the prejudices and inconsistencies and judgments. True wisdom sees through the illusion and goes to the nature of reality. It's the only way that we can gain insight into the dark morass of the universe and bring light that will enable others to see. Each of us individually has a different way of connecting through our breath because each of us has got something different to offer. But not just in meditation. The imperative is to have the mind and the breath resting together at all times. As we work, as we walk along, as we ski, as I deliver this, as you sit there, it enables us to arrive at that point where we can make a difference. That wonderful point Viktor Frankl points out. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So there's a space between stimulus and response. And in that space, we have the power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. The mind and breath resting together allows that space to come alive. It allows us to love rather than to react with what's going on.
So, when I consider my own inner and outer realities, the image that I find most helpful is that of a horizontal axis and a vertical axis, like crossing like this. The horizontal axis representing everything of this body, this life, this world, this realm, time and space, everything like that makes up what we might call the horizontal axis, all that's manifest. And then we have the vertical axis, all that we aspire to, all that we long for, all the invisible, lofty and too wonderful for words, kingdom of heavenish reality. That simple image to me perfectly illustrates the task that we all face of somehow bringing together our divine and human natures, of having our inner and outer realities meet, and thereby finding our way, finding traction in our human existence. To live into the fullness of our humanity is to live at that cross-section where those two axes meet, the sweet spot. Most of us, I think, are inclined to live either too much on the vertical or too much on the horizontal. I know for myself, especially in my younger years, I could be so off with the fairies, spiritually wise, just so full of idealism and aspiration, and somehow lacked the ability to really get traction in my actual life with the limitations and constraints of the reality I was living in and the limitations of my own capacities. And this is what we touched on last week when we spoke about humility. The need for all of us to radically accept ourselves exactly as we are, strengths, weaknesses, limitations, and all. And others are quite the opposite, people who are so at the effect of their surroundings, their circumstances, the conditions of their lives, the goings-on in the world, such that their inner life gets neglected and suffers, and life becomes difficult and burdensome, something to survive and get through. It's so easy in that inner orientation to get thrown about emotionally and psychologically when things aren't going so well. It's too easy to end up becoming embittered and hardened by life. So we probably all lean towards living either slightly more on the vertical axis or slightly more on the horizontal. And what we're being invited to here this morning is to bring these two orientations into some kind of balance. To use, as we've been talking about these last few weeks, the wisdom of our different centers of knowing, the intelligences of our hearts and our bodies and our minds, to aid us in finding the equilibrium necessary for navigating our way through life and living into our unique fullness and authenticity and freedom and generativity. What would it look like to be so grounded in our humanity, so rooted in reality exactly as it is, yet so in touch with that which transcends and infuses everything on that so-called horizontal plane? To be able to bring to bear a vibrant, vital, alive inner life to whatever outer reality we're dealing with. To have one foot in this realm and the other foot in whatever realm exists the other side of death. To be able to somehow download the so-called kingdom of heaven in this physical world that we live in. The center point of these two axes is the most generative and alive and beautiful place to live in, to live into and out from. When our inner and outer realities can meet, can coincide, can come together in some kind of coherence and complementarity, then we're home free. And one example of someone who was beginning to live this way was Etty Hillesum, who we just heard a tiny bit from. And there'll be way more to say about her in April. But for now, suffice to say, Etty was a woman in her late 20s, moving through her life, full of aspiration and idealism, yet living into the reality that she was likely to die in Auschwitz, which she did in 1943 at the age of 29. We see in her diaries that she kept in the last years of her life how she was able to bring together these two natures, her divine and human nature together, and to live with poise and equanimity and generosity of spirit as she moved towards her death. Crucially, Etty understood her place in history. She accepted her life just as it was and received reality just as it was. In the midst of dire circumstances, she cultivated a robust and beautiful trust in a love, capital L, that she knew in her bones, that she knew contained and transcended all she was encountering and bearing witness to. And hatred had no place in her. To me, she truly is an example of someone who learned how to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with her God. She brought together the beauty of a clear mind, an activated heart, and a grounded physicality, all of which gave her the strength and the wisdom to endure and to face towards her inevitable death willingly and trustingly. I just want to share a tiny snippet from her diary because this illustrates it well. So this is just not long before she died in Auschwitz, and she says, "I don't know why. I am so calm. It is sometimes as if I was standing on the parapets of the palace of history, looking down over far distant lands. This bit of history we are experiencing right now is something I know I can stand up to. I know what is happening, and yet my head is clear. But sometimes I feel as if a layer of ashes were being sprinkled over my heart, as if my face were withering and decaying before my very eyes, and as if everything were falling apart in front of me, and my heart were letting everything go. But these are brief moments. Then everything falls back into place. My head is clear again, and I can once more bear and stand up to this piece of history that's ours. For once you have begun to walk with God, you need only keep on walking, and all of life becomes one long stroll. Such a marvelous feeling." And so I think this is what it boils down to, that we often talk here in the chapel about that quote, cultivating a sensitive and rewarding relationship with eternal truth and love. The thing about that statement is that it's about relationship. Bringing together our inner and outer realities is fundamentally acknowledging and knowing in our bones that we are met and accompanied and assisted, come what may, in whatever circumstances we find ourselves in. That peace that passes understanding is exactly that. It transcends our understanding. It's not logical, but it is available. The trick is simply to want it, to open to it, and to receive it. As James Finley would say, to cultivate an inner stance, that offers the least resistance to being overtaken by that peace or whatever other divine capacities that we've been talking about here. In Etty's case, just as the world around her was imploding and contracting and diminishing in all the worst possible ways, it's as if her inner life, her inner world, did exactly the opposite. Her own felt sense of belonging in the universe, her own sense of inner abundance and connection grew. Perhaps we, just like Etty, could learn to live inside of a safe, ample dwelling place within ourselves, a place of comfort, presence, accompaniment, hope, forgiveness, expansive love. And like her, we might be able to say, for once you have begun to walk with God, you need only keep on walking with him, and all of life becomes one long stroll. Such a marvelous feeling. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Well, we sort of come to the end of the series, and I always like to give anyone an opportunity to come back at us with anything, any questions or anything they want to do. I always say that we offer this information with a willingness to be wrong. So if anybody wants to come back or ask a question or do anything, then please feel free to do so. Silence is also okay as well. But I just want to give us that opportunity if anyone wants to say anything at all. Yes, Jules. Thank you.
I just want to thank you both. This so resonated with me. I love the outer world and the inner world, and I've listened to Heather speak before and Etty, and I just think it's so inspirational that someone could be in that dark of a place and have faith. And I just love this series, and thank you.
Thanks, Jules. So appreciate that. Heather will take that. Good. Thank you, Jules. Anybody else? Yes. There we are. Jan.
Thanks so much, you guys. This is just right on. You are the real deal. And I really appreciate it. And all that you've said about breath, which is so, in my experience, so absolutely true, that connection. I just want to mention I had an experience once I have a friend who does gong work. She does musical. And I was lying on a table and the gongs were right there. And I had an experience of like my physical body dissolving. And it was like, oh girl, you got, as long as you've got your breath, we're good. We can navigate. But what happens when you don't have your breath anymore? When you're releasing the body? How do you navigate? That's a question
You're asking me a question. So
yeah.
The question is, when you're releasing your body, in what way?
Well, because when you no longer have your breath, which has been your way, to connect, then how do you navigate the next, whatever it is that's the next thing?
You mean when you're dying?
Apparently.
When you're dying, yes.
Just interesting.
No, there's this. Okay, so good to get these simple questions out of the way first. I mean, I have to say the honest answer is I don't know. Sorry? Then you are your breath, yeah. I mean, my instinct is that is the case, that we become part of that spirit, that we go, thank you, Liz, you should be up here. When you become part, I think you do, you just exhale, expire. Isn't that interesting? When you die, you expire, and you become the breath. That's lovely that you bring that up. And you become everything that you are with. And even your body expires, doesn't it? It becomes the earth. It becomes everything else. And it feeds what's going on. I think that's what happens to our spirits. And but thank you so much. And as a singer, your breath is so important as well. And the breath produces the vibration that connects us with everybody else. My breath is producing what I'm speaking with you now. And I'm connecting, well, hopefully, connecting with you through and my breath is connecting my mind and spirit, and understanding is produced through that. So thank you. Anybody
just
else?
Just one other thing on that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what I've been so inspired by Etty Hillisom's life in that she had the humility to get that, like, her life was just her life. Like, I think we tend to take our lives so seriously, and we just make so much of our individual rights, and, you know, we get so uptight about our lives and our deaths in a way. And she had the humility just to see that she was living this one life at one time in history, and it was going to end. Life would continue after her. And I find that helpful when I think of dying, that it's okay, someone else will carry on living. You know what I mean? It's just not all about me.
Thanks. Great.